Speaking of money, does the MPCA have enough money? My concerns right now are about groundwater in the MPCA. I live not too far from the water Gremlin plant, which is also not too far from a wood treatment plant. And
Right.
so now I'm hearing that the MPCA didn't know about this or couldn't check on it for 15 years. And they all connect right to the aquifer. So just wondering if they're funded enough or if they don't have enough staff or why that's happening.
So and I serve on the Environment Committee. This is my second term serving on the Environment Finance Committee, and the MPCA is one of so Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Sorry, there's a lot of acronyms in our world. It falls within, the budgets that we oversee and the issues that we take care of. I would say that they aren't given the funding. I know the proposal last year from the GOP Environment Finance Chair was to significantly take away their funding. So the alternate push is, there are those of us who want to make sure that they have the tools and the staff that they need so that they can monitor things and make sure our communities are safe, that we do have clean water, clean air, clean soil, so we, all those things. But the other side of that is, we don't want to make it too burdensome on the businesses, and let's roll back some things and make it easier for them. Well, this situation with Water Gremlin in White Bear Township, which impacts several districts and parts of several cities, is a great example of what happens when you entirely rely on a business to self-report. And so that's why the MPCA didn't know, because the numbers they were getting from the company made it sound like everything was fine. And I'm not implying that that necessarily was intentional, but it's obviously very troubling and very, very problematic that we could be polluting the air that folks were breathing for 15 plus years and not even know it. And I think especially when it's a chemical like TCE. I know the discussions I've had, since we learned of the Water Gremlin situation, have kind of been about, if a chemical is that dangerous, one, do we really even need to be using it? And then two, shouldn't the burdens of reporting and, the additional, maybe we should have higher requirements based on how dangerous the chemical is. Because I recognize that running a business takes a lot of effort, and, I'm the child of a small business owner, and, but at the same time, here's this corporation owned by a foreign company, it's a foreign company, and they were harming our residents for really almost 2 decades, and we didn't even know. Obviously, there's a problem there. So I expect that we'll be, as the situation with this particular incident, evolves. I imagine we'll continue to have discussions about how we can prevent that from happening in the future.
If I can just add on to that, what's a couple interesting factoids about that is, one, it has to do with the formula they had that was incorrect, that they tried to say MPCA gave them the wrong formula. Two, it has to do with that when the job for managing that got passed on, the bad information got passed on, so by the time it went to the next person in line, they had no idea they would do something wrong or wouldn't even know to look that they were doing something wrong. And so it created this kind of bad situation that apparently since 2002 had been dumping unnecessary, unhealthy amounts into the atmosphere. And I'm not an apologist. I think the settlement was too small. I'm unhappy with that, and I'm looking forward to watching us move forward to make sure we make that area whole again in whatever way we can. But I will just say this, that I think it's important to have all the facts. They didn't have to tell us. Not that that's not an excuse, but they were changing their system in March. And we would never have known had they not self-reported. And I think that's just an important thing to think about, that they did take responsibility independently without being pushed. Now, it's still inexcusable, and I think $4.5 million is the beginning part, another $3 million is as specific remedies, wasn't enough to fix what's going on there, and I think we're gonna have a lot of long-term problems as we see what effect that had. But I think it's important to understand that the system was designed because we don't give MPCA enough of ability to oversight some of these things, that we rely on that self-reporting. an error made. I'm not saying it was an honest error. I'm not saying it was or wasn't. But I am saying that in July, they began to recognize something was wrong, and by January, they owned it. And they got shut down. And they produce something like half of all the battery posts in America and 30% of all the battery posts worldwide. And so when they shut down, literally battery companies everywhere started to shut down because they couldn't produce, right? And it's 300 jobs. And so I want to just be thoughtful about that we have to kind of see it from both sides. That being said, if there is harm, I'm firmly in Jamie's camp on this. If there was harm, and you've been doing that for 17 years, I'm not sure that the current settlement is enough remedy. And I think it is, as she said very, very perfectly, it is the beginning to this process of how we make it whole.
Well, and to be, as the attorney here, the settlement does not preclude residents from civil action either as individuals or in a class action situation. So I know some folks, they just read the headline and they thought that meant that they didn't have a right to do any additional follow-up, and this is just the beginning and has to do with the violations of their permit to the MPCA. Would I have liked to have been part of those conversations and that discussion before they signed the paper? Sure. But I do think that it is important for folks to realize that if there is harm done, there are still potentially remedies for folks in the way that our legal system works. Because I know I've heard from, so just to be clear, in our district, the only people in 42B that are potentially affected are people who've either lived or worked in the Gem Lake area, and then there's an area in White Bear Township and White Bear Lake. And TCE, because I also think it's important to be really clear about the facts of the chemical so that people aren't, one, they should be concerned, but I don't want people to be unnecessarily concerned if it isn't likely to have impacted them directly. So it's a very volatile chemical that was put out into the air. It dissipates very quickly. So, you know, in my mind, for example, the folks I'm most concerned about is if you were working at the Gem Lake Golf Course outdoors, breathing in that air for a prolonged amount of time. But if you just like visited Gem Lake occasionally, or, you know, were indoors, probably the effects are likely not as scary. And the other tricky thing with this too is that it's not a chemical like asbestos where it's going to be really clear, where we're ever going to be able to really directly, with the science we have right now, it's going to be really hard to directly link, oh, I got this kind of cancer. It's because, you know, it's directly causally related to this. You know, so I know there's a woman who's currently pregnant who lives in the affected area. And, you know, as a mom, I certainly, that's my biggest concern, are folks like that. And I think there's also legitimate concern about property values in that area, because right now, if you Google Gem Lake, the first probably 10 stories that are going to pop up right now are involving this pollution. And so I think those are all legitimate concerns. I'm also working with the MPCA to bring both the Department of Health and the MPCA out to Gem Lake and hold essentially office hours so that residents have a meaningful chance to come in and talk face-to-face with state staff and ask questions and learn more, because I think it's important that people have accurate information about this situation. But it's certainly something we all care about a lot and are watching really closely and doing everything we can to advocate for residents.
The last thing I'll add is just that the part of the settlement has, like, they have to plant 1,500 trees. I'm not sure how that equates in there, but the other part of it is they're starting next week with immediate well testing, and they're going to be going throughout all of Gem Lake. Originally, they were going to do the affected area, but I've asked them to do all of Gem Lake. I know they've done the municipal wells as well, and so they're going to be starting that process immediately, getting on the ground and getting after that stuff. And we've been pushing them to be as fast as they can to bump whatever they have to bump to make sure this is taken care of so we can understand what the full scope is.